Stephen?
What happens when destiny debates philosophy? Let's find out.
I don't like the arguments that are rooted in history or in scientific fact to establish these truths, because people are doing that because they don't want to have the more difficult sociological or the social argument.
At this point, Peter Boghossian unleashes his secret weapon upon destiny.
Swap out David and in Brett.
Brett Hall.
Okay.
I like this guy. He's sharp.
Okay. Brett I will fight with here. What does biological truth mean to you?
I don't understand why biological truth continues to bother Destiny so much.
There's biological knowledge. I can tell you about what the differences between sexually reproducing organisms happen to be, and the existence of these problematic cases, these edge cases, do not refute the existence of the binary male and female.
That's a really important point that's going to come up later. Just because there's an exception to a rule does not disprove the rule.
I guess just from an ontological sense, saying like biological truth, I feel like gives way more philosophical weight to a scientist than they ever should have.
There is such a thing as objective truth. It exists. Whether or not we can fully understand it is another question.
Right, to be able to define like, well, what is a true feature? Like, do trees exist separate from leaves, separate from the ground? Does, can any collection of matter be defined as a thing? This is a very boring, like, epistemic metaphysics question, but yeah, that's the only thing I would be uncomfortable saying that, like, this is a biological truth. And it's like, I mean, insofar as this is our system of biology, I guess, yeah.
So would I. I would just say this is our best explanation of how it is that, organisms happen to reproduce, is the male and female.
There's a hierarchy of explanations. There has to be one explanation that is better than the other explanations. One explanation is going to be more in line with objective truth than the others.
And the mind is an asexual thing. In principle, in some distant future, this mind that runs on our brain could be downloaded onto a computer somewhere, and the computer would have no gender. And in fact, AGI would have no gender. So therefore, minds have no gender. They do not have a sex. You're infinitely elastic to choose your gender expression because of the way in which our mind works. Granted that brains may very well be able to be distinguished as male or female once you put in an MRI, but we are not brains, we're minds.
I feel like you get into really weird, I guess it depends on how you're viewing the mind-brain distinction there, because then my next question, I would just go organ through organ.
I guess this is what happens when Destiny gets philosophical. No wonder he doesn't want to do this.
Maybe I could very easily ask, is a penis a male or female thing? And maybe we could gender that as male, but if I were to say, is there such thing as a female or a male arm, or a heart, or any other part of the body?
A skeleton. An archaeologist digs up a skeleton. They have the ability to use science to identify if that skeleton was male or female. If they dig up a skeleton arm, that arm was male or female.
In the same way, or a similar way that you identify a brain as being either male or female by looking at the MRI, you could say, the heart actually belongs to a male, because if you drill down into the cells, you'd see that there are XY chromosomes there, indicating a male, or just YY chromosomes inside of it.
I would say, I guess, like, the reason why I'm neutral on this and why I don't enjoy this conversation is because I feel like there isn't very much pursuit of any type of ontological truth about the category of male or female. I think that this conversation is 100% held hostage by people that want to go on and make social arguments about it.
That's a crazy claim within itself. Making observations about objective truth is 100% of the time held hostage by people that just want to win arguments.
So who should be allowed to participate in sports, who should be allowed to whatever, and because those arguments are best if you can source them from some scientific foundation, people are like, oh, well, I want to argue the science now about this.
And I think Peter Boghossian kind of calls him out here in a very subtle way. He poses it as a question.
So I was going to ask, isn't the way that people answer that question more ideological than scientific?
Yeah, but people people do the same thing with history. If you look at Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Palestine, people like to argue, well, historically, this happened, and then it gives them justification for their current actions.
He's literally arguing against a study of the past because of how people wield knowledge, essentially.
But if you go to Russia and Ukraine, they'll give you two different histories. If you go to Israel, Palestine, they'll give you two different histories. If you talk to pro-trans and anti-trans people, they'll give you two different scientific definitions.
But that doesn't change the reality of what is scientifically true.
Because people would rather, if you can source your things scientifically, you don't have enough to argue the social part.
I'm not sure how you're going to be able to find solutions to these social issues without acknowledging objective truth, though.
But the reality is I just don't think they should be connected. Like, we could imagine a world where 1% of women have spikes that come out of their wrists. we wouldn't let these women participate in any combat sport because they'd be killing people. It doesn't matter if they're women or not, we just wouldn't. They'd have an unfair advantage. Much the same, we could acknowledge that, we could say, okay, well, trans women are real, but because of the bodies they've been born into and the advantages granted thereof, we probably just wouldn't let them compete in sports with non-trans people. The same way that if you're a fifth grader who's been held back 15 years, you're not going to be on the same sports team as my son playing soccer. That's just not going to happen, right?
Wow, and we shouldn't connect that with objective truth.
So I don't like the arguments that are rooted in history or in scientific fact to establish these truths, because people are doing that because they don't want to have the more difficult sociological or the social argument, I think.
It depends on where you're starting.
I'll give you last word.
Wow, so he genuinely believes that he's just not interested in conversations about what is objectively true. Knowledge doesn't interest me because of how people wield knowledge.
Depends on where you're starting.
I'll give you last word.
I was just saying, if we're immediately when I see the prompt, I'm automatically put in a scientific mindset. So I think to myself, well, if what we're talking about is just trying to explain how it is that we human beings exist, well, we human beings exist because males mate with females, and that's how reproduction works.
But why does that matter?
It doesn't matter, except if you're interested in something like scientific truth or good explanations in science.
The problem is we are facing an ideology that wants to redefine objective truth. So don't be surprised when you have people such as Peter and Brett who say, you know what, this is a worthy conversation. This is a conversation worth having.
So it's the same as you can dress up your cat like a dog all you like, but it's still going to be a cat at the end of the day.
So in terms of scientific truth, do you think that trans people don't know that they were born as the sex that they were?
You are disputing the concept of sex. You said it earlier. We can play it right here.
I don't generally agree with the idea of sex in the first place, because I think there's so many abnormalities that it should just exist on a spectrum.
Now this individual is asking, do you really think a trans person would question the concept of sex when you just did that?
Do you think that trans people don't know that they were born as the sex that they were? Do you think they're just fundamentally disputing that?
People are either male or female, except for these small edge cases. That's the biological reality.
Once again, if a person, that edge case, if you say there's only two, then
where do they fit? Where do they fit into the two?
They don't fit into the two, but it doesn't deny the fact that there are two boxes. And you've got
Okay.
these two
Then
categories.
Do the other people just float around the boxes?
I think the question is, like, definitionally, wouldn't there need to be a third box then?
Yeah.
For intersex?
You can have a third box if you like, but
Well, that means there's not just two. That means there's not just two sexes.
what's our claim again?
If there are only two sexes, male and female.
I can grant you the existence of the edge case middle ground intersex, but that does not refute the idea that animals, sexually reproducing animals, are male or female.
Doesn't any existence of an exception to the rule mean that the rule doesn't exist?
Here is where Brett just succinctly dismantles this idea.
Exceptions to rules prove there must be a rule. The rule exists, and therefore there are exceptions to the rule.
How so?
Well,
If there's something that doesn't fit the rule, if you say there's only zeros and ones and there's a two, then, well, I mean, zeros and ones are still the only thing that exists except for this two, but we'll just put that away. We don't need to think about that. Any exception to the rule means it's not a rule.
No, that's not the way that the rules work.
It's like saying, well, there's a lion and a tiger. There's only a lion and a tiger, but there's an ostrich, so that statement is not correct. You're not making an observation about a scientific rule, which is an understanding of the fabric of reality itself.
You could have, for example, there exist in the world tigers and lions, and they're two distinct things. However, a tiger can mate with a lion, and you can get tigons and ligers. Those things exist, but that does not refute the existence of tigers and lions. And in the same way, you can have males and females, and that's a biological rule. There exist these things called males and females, which are required for our species to reproduce. And if they didn't exist, if there were no such thing as these two different sexes, you wouldn't have a continuation of the species.
Just fascinating to me to see such links to avoid a discussion about the existence of objective truth. Everyone who's interested in making observations about objective truth are only doing so because they don't have arguments that are strong enough to compete without objective truth, which is the level of, it's truly a remarkable statement.